We might get started, everyone. Got a few people still rolling into the room, which is okay. Welcome, everyone. First of all, we are going to record the session just so we can share it with attendees and those who couldn't attend. And we might even create some snippets as well, just to let everyone know for consent reasons. And before we start, Georgia is just going to share up on the screen now a Slido instructions. So Slido is just a bit of software that lets us ask some questions throughout the webinar. And it's going to let us gauge a few things from the audience and help us to curate the conversation a little bit. So just going to put that up there now, let you guys join just whilst we do a few introductions. And I'm sure I'll remind you again before we start. The more people join, the more gauge we're going to get on the room. So please go ahead. Really easy once you've scanned that QR code. So whilst you get a chance to do that, a few introductions of the people speaking today. It's firstly myself, I'm Head of Operations at GSA. I'm coming up to 12 years at GSA, and I'm going to play a role of moderator today. I'm not necessarily an expert in cyber, but have some responsibility for cyber and IT at GSA. But the guys that are going to be speaking, they are experts. And first of all, we've got Chris Mclaughin, who's here on my left. He's Principal of Cyber Risk at Clyde & Co. And he's was head of cyber solutions at in the insurance industry at an international firm, and he's got 25 years experience in this field, starting in military intelligence, which is very interesting, I would say, and I'm sure we'll hear a little bit about that throughout the conversation. He's also held senior roles in professional services and financial services firms, which I think a few people in the room are from, so he's got quite a bit of experience on that front. And being from Clyde & Co, they recently won our Touch of Colour, Kids Express and GSA's Touch of Colour last week. So congratulations.
Very much.
In order for Clyde & Co. Next, we've got Chris Rouse, who has decided to test our technical ability. He's come down with the flu, maybe COVID, we're not sure, just this morning. So he's joining us online today. We've run a few tests with the audio and fingers crossed that goes off without a hitch. Hey, the irony of doing an IT webinar and maybe having IT issues. We'll see how we go. So Chris is formerly the Chief Information Security Officer at Steadfast Group, and just recently promoted, and congratulations on moving to the role of EGM of technology across the whole of the Steadfast Group. So he now has responsibility of technology right across the group. So congratulations to him and welcome.
Thank you.
Chris has been an integral part for myself and for GSA in the last 12 to 18 months, helping us modernise and secure our own IT network and infrastructure. And with his new role being responsible for technology broader than just that, he's going to be a big part of our next 12 to 18 months as we take on a strategy at GSA to improve some of our systems and the systems our clients see as well. So you might not hear directly from Chris, but the kinds of improvements you see across GSA coming up is going to have a lot to do with Chris. Chris has depth of experience coming up to 20 years, and a lot of that before being at Steadfast was in the legal and financial services group responsible for technology and information security. So he's, again, brings a lot of that experience at our other Chris. Let's see if we get confused with the two Chris's today. He brings a lot of that experience to the table as well. And we've also got Johnnie. So Johnnie from GSA's portfolio manager in our professional and financial alliance team, 6 years at GSA. And he's a key part of shaping GSA as part of our leadership team. It's a pleasure to have Johnnie involved as well. And also in the room is Georgia in the corner. She's been at GSA coming up to 1 year now, part of the operations team, the growing operations team. And she's going to be marshalling our Slido presentation. Another reminder to join that. And also going to be in charge of our Teams webinar. So if you've got any questions, particularly for those people online, you can put them through the chat. You can also put them through Slido once you've joined that. And Georgia will relay those questions onto us either throughout the conversation or at the end when we have a bit of Q&A time. And for those people in the room, feel free to put up your hand whenever you like to ask a question. Try and keep it conversational. And we're going to aim for about 40, 50 minutes as a sweet spot. Gives us some time for a bit of networking and chatting afterwards and so on. In fact, I might start my timer on that so we're not running over. And then last introduction actually is to everyone in the room and everyone online. We've had a look at the people attending and the people signed up. And there really is quite a broad spectrum of people. We've got people in technology roles, in risk and compliance roles. We've got heads of technology and heads of risk and compliance. We've got some MDs in the room, a few CFOs. Obviously, a lot of insurance becomes a responsibility, so CFO quite often, and also a few CEOs. And what I thought was most amazing is when we looked through the list of people attending, we really have a lot, if not all, industries covered. We've got education, health, property, financial services, construction, hospitality, aged care, recruitment, and I could really go on with that list. Almost every company represented a different part of the business community, which is great to see, but also I think tells us a lot about cyber as a topic and it being a focal point for everyone. This isn't just an IT, a tech industry item. This is really affecting everyone, something that is on the radar for a lot of businesses. We're going to focus on three main topics today to keep it nice and simple. Our first one will be cyber risk in the context of business strategy. Next, we'll look at the hard cyber insurance market and how that's being navigated. And finally, we'll look at the essential 8, which was how we started this conversation, this webinar, and hopefully giving people some information to help create or continue with a practical cyber improvement plan across the businesses. So that's it for introductions. We're going to get started now. And that first topic being cyber risk in the context of business strategy. And I think really important to look at risk and strategy side by side. That was transformative for me when I thought about that at GSA and really understood that cyber was more than just IT and was a real driver for change. Cyber improvements lead to user experience improvements. You lead to improvement for staff, improvement for clients, and it really is so much more than just cyber. So I'm going to throw to Chris. First of all, the Slido question, actually, before I forget that. We'll throw that up on, and we want to get a gauge of the people in the room of just how important cyber is at your business and how important it is. So the first question is, on a scale of 1 to 10, we just want you to answer there, where does cyber risk sit on the importance ladder for your board and senior leadership? It'd be interesting to understand that, and we'll use that as we're speaking. So whilst you're answering that, we will throw to Chris Rouse first. And first question is cyber an executive level problem or is it a board level problem? It's brought up in both forums, but where do you see it fit and where do you see it being most effective?
Thanks, Rocco, and apologies, my voice is a bit flaky, so hopefully everyone can hear me fine. So I actually see it as it's equally weighted in terms of, I guess, the executive level and the board level. Now, I guess I've got what I consider a bit of a positive spin, and it'd be interesting to see as the results come through from Slido if people agree or disagree with me on this one. But I would have said, if you'd asked me 5 years ago if the director level was taking cyber risk seriously, I wouldn't have been able to tell you they were. You know, it was kind of something that someone else took care of, nothing to do with them. Now, I guess in recent years, there's been a bit of a pivot, and that's, I'd like to say it's because directors have suddenly become more conscious of what's going on in cyber, but the reality is it's probably in relation to the liability element that they, they're, for lack of a better word, they're looking to cover their own arse now. So it's quite important that they focus on this. And I think there's been some really recent examples of why boards are starting to take notice. That would probably be, the landmark ruling that's recently, I think it's probably 2 weeks ago, where ASIC, has won against RA Advice, which is a financial services group, and this was in relation to them breaching their license obligations in cyber. So this is not a standalone ruling. There's a fair few of these coming out in the media recently, and I guess it's starting to show that there is that real need to focus on cyber risk because of the fact that it's going to have real implications for the company. We're not talking about someone getting an embarrassing phishing email anymore. We're potentially talking about companies being offline for days, weeks, months, potentially even going bankrupt. With things like ransomware. We're also talking about people potentially looking to lose their license to trade, as the the ASIC case has shown. So I think there's certainly a bit of a focus at the board level. Now, as I said, it was about a 50-50 split. And I feel like because the boards are starting to sit up and take notice, this is really coming down from the exec level as well. So as you mentioned, I've only just recently in the last few days sort of moved into the exec level at Steadfast, but I was finding it was very heavily driven from the execs for updates on the cyber risk for the business, and also keeping them abreast of our remediation steps that we were taking for any gaps we've identified. And I've got to say that I hope I'm not the only person who's experiencing this, where people are actually putting more of a focus on cyber. Again, coming back to 5 years ago, it was a completely different landscape.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Definitely seen that transformation myself, where it's becoming less of an item on the board meeting that has to be addressed to really being a topic of conversation. I asked that same question to Chris M. Where do you see it?
Look, I pretty much agree with Chris. I mean, if you go back 5 years, cyber was either number 3 or number 5 on the risk register, and you'd ask people why, and they say, well, we've got to take it. It's important, but we don't really know why it's important. We just know it is, so it's there. And I think, from the board level, there's probably not many board members now in Australia that aren't on another board who has a major incident.
Yes.
And so they feel the pain. They see how much damage it actually does to the business. And so they're taking those lessons across to their different positions.
Correct.
And then I think from the executive level, I think some of the ways that we're actually improving communication. So we're moving away from qualitative to quantitative risk assessment. We're actually aligning reporting the same way as the executives see other operational risks, and they're much more informed of what that risk means to the balance sheet and the balance sheet exposure. And I also think that one of the reasons that's happened is because we've seen more cyber insurance in the last few years. And that's the questions that the insurers are asking, like, what's the balance sheet exposure to a loss? And so it's getting to the CFO, it's getting to the CEO as they're signing off the policies. They're getting much more visibility on what the balance sheet exposure is.
Yeah, I think it's a good segue actually into that next question is cyber risk. Is it only about reducing your cyber risk? And Johnny, we've talked about this a little bit, and I'll probably direct this question to Chris R. First of all. Is it more than just cyber risk? Is it a D&O exposure? Like if you are not covering your cyber, or might you have a directors and office as liability? And will it also have a detrimental impact just on business performance if you're not up to scratch on your IT?
It certainly can. I mean, the first example would be, the business impact when someone, say, suffers a ransomware. You're potentially talking about your employees not being able to work for weeks. I think, though, what I'd like to sort of focus on is that there is actually a happy medium. There are measures, practical measures that businesses can put in place, where not only are you actually reducing your cyber risk, but you're actually improving the user experience as well. And I think probably I'll give you a couple of examples from my own career, which is I've worked in organizations where everyone's had to update their Wi-Fi credentials on their corporate devices on a regular basis. And you can move to a more secure certificate-based authentication for that. You're actually improving the cyber security, but you're also improving your user experience. No one's having to remember passwords every few weeks. Along with, I think we're all quite familiar now with, biometric security on our mobile devices, like Face ID and fingerprint, etc. Now, these sort of measures are being rolled out, the likes of Windows Hello on corporate devices. Again, moving that away from, a user having to remember a long password or having to cycle passwords on a regular basis, and allow them to actually, take the benefits of having a passwordless login at the same time. So I think there's sort of a happy balance. People think that, more security means more hoops to jump through, a loss in productivity. That's not the case. There's always a balance. I acknowledge that. But, there are certainly measures that companies can put in place which are going to long term really help, their employees and hopefully reduce cyber risk without the detriment of the overhead.
Yeah. Johnny, I'll throw to you now. Are you seeing the clients you're working with, is it really just a cyber risk, or are you having to talk to them about it being a D&O exposure and beyond?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I'll just go back to what you were talking about first of all, about it being an executive or a board level decision, because I think that has application for companies of a certain size, but in the mid-market space, some of them don't have independent boards. And I was at a presentation with all of the regulators last week, and they were saying that cyber has to be a corporate governance issue, and it can't just be a siloed IT event. Like, your CEO and your management team have to be aware of what your cyber strategies are. There's no value in just having your IT team with an unknown budget, unknown workflow addressing it. This needs to be part of corporate governance. Going back to your question about D&O, 100% it's a D&O issue. A D&O policy covers alleged wrongful acts in the management of the business. And the most common one of them is a breach of duty. So you owe a breach of duty to employees to keep records safe, to your shareholders to keep the business operational. So if you are negligent in failing to invest suitable financial and technical resources into making sure that the business is suitably protected, then if you're a business which massively relies on it, so online retail, manufacturing, logistics, if you go down 2 months and you essentially lose 2 months worth of gross profit, that's going to impact on your shareholders, and that could be very conceivably a D&O issue.
Very interesting. It's black and white when you kind of put it that way. Almost precise wording there.
Which is why it's so important that when you see a cyber exclusion going on a D&O wording, if you don't know what you're doing, you could just say, "Oh, don't worry," because they've got a cyber policy, but they cover two completely different things. And maybe we'll touch on this later, but I think cyber policies are very much misunderstood in the market in terms of what they cover. Most people think they cover cyber crime, which is one of the few things most of them actually don't cover. So if you see a cyber exclusion on a D&O policy, that's alarm bells, because that cover will not be plugged by a separate cyber policy.
So another question in this topic, but whilst we're going into that, George, I might just look at the answers from that first question. It'd be interesting to see where that importance level sits. It's clear from our speakers that it should be close to 10. And what we're seeing is a pretty even split between 7, 8 and 10. So I agree. I think if we asked that question 5 years ago, we'd get some pretty different answers, but it's clear it is pretty important to the people in the room.
Even a year ago, I as a broker, I've noticed a noticeable shift in insurance purchasing behavior, but also just when you're having conversations with executive team, it's now very much on their radar.
Absolutely. So to round out this kind of topic, I'm going to ask Chris M this question, and it's one that I find really interesting, because when things do pop up, the question is, where's it come from? So the question is, where are the threats actually coming from? Are they very targeted personal threats and attacks, or are they scattergun approaches that are targeting a whole industry or a whole database, and companies are just falling into that scattergun?
Look, there's a number of threat actors out there that have got different levels of sophisticated and motivation. If you've got a sophisticated threat actor like a nation state or an organised criminal gang, there's not much you can do to defend yourself, because they've got the time, they've got the motivation, they've got the capability. Most of these guys they don't come in and they don't do a smash and grab. They'll be in your organisation, for potentially up to a year, if not more, if they're not detected. And what they're doing is they're looking for that sort of big payout. So if you look at some of the, the big cases in the US, where 500 million credit card customers were affected, the threat actor was actually in there for about 2 years. And there's a black market on credit card information. So what they did is they waited till the market was a high point, and then they cashed out and they sold. So there is, I think everybody goes, the cyber criminals, they're, heading away. Well, it's actually a global ecosystem. So if you wanted to go to get malware for financial services, you would go to South America, because there's a specialism there. If you want zero-day attacks, you would have gone to Russia. If you want credit cards data and you want phone cards, you go to Vietnam and Cambodia. And we know through sort of the ransomware threat actors that sort of we see on a daily basis, if you even are very unsophisticated, you can become an affiliate of one of the sophisticated gangs, and you basically act on their behalf. They'll give you all of the information, all of the tools you need, and you just fire off, and they'll take a 50% cut of what it is. So it's very sophisticated. You can be a victim of a script kiddie, somebody who doesn't know what they're doing. Anybody in this room can look online and you can pull out all of the tools you need to hack a company. And over a weekend watching YouTube videos, you can cause a lot of damage to an organization if you don't know what you're doing. And it ranges from that all the way up to, again, state-sponsored, nation states,
Wow.
the most qualified people in the world with the most advanced technology, who actually go into this ecosystem and buy what we call zero-day malware, which is there is no defense against. So it's a very sophisticated ecosystem.
Yeah.
If you're going to become a victim of a sophisticated attacker, again, you're probably going to lose.
Yeah.
But if you've got all the basic controls in place, you'll bat off 80% of the attacks.
That's how you respond.
It's how you respond. But
Yeah.
a lot of the attacks are actually coming from more unsophisticated. And Chris will probably sees this probably on a daily basis on what's happening.
Yeah.
But it's a very sophisticated ecosystem. It is global. The threat actors, work together. I've heard people say that, if the global criminal ecosystem was a country, it'd have the third highest GDP in the world. It makes more money than illicit drugs. If you get caught, you probably go to jail for maybe 6 months or a year. If you get caught doing drugs, you're in jail for 10 years. So we've even heard of examples of bikie gangs in Australia moving away from drugs into cybercrime because there's less risk and there's more reward.
There you go. That's terrifying.
Just an insurance tag on to that point, what you're saying about them potentially being in your network for up to 2 years before you actually notice any impact. That's why you want to be mindful of any policies that limit the retroactive cover to the inception date of the policy if you are purchasing cyber now or if you purchased it recently. Because, as you say, if the proximate cause is the infiltration 2 years ago and you've got a retroactive date of today, then if you have a issue,
it's definitely something to look out for in your policy then.
Yeah.
So it's interesting you say that. We were fortunate enough to attend a Lloyd's of London development program, and one of the topics was cyber, as you'd expect, and they brought up on the screen the dark web. They have access to it, obviously, and took us through all the kinds of things that you can buy and trade on the dark web, and it was eye-opening to see that it is right there at your fingertips.
If you wanted to conduct an attack against an organisation, you could hire somebody for about $1,000 to $2,000, and they would probably launch an attack against them. And you can do the scary thing is they'll do it against individuals. So if you want to compromise an individual in an organisation, and we see a lot more executives being targeted. Not just targeted in terms of sort of trying to get money to gain from them, but actually try to get their credentials so that then they can compromise their organizations or potentially blackmail them. So, it's not just an organization, it's actually individuals within that organizations. And another thing we've seen is where a ransomware gang has hit a target, they're actually contacting some of the board members through social media and saying, hey, did you know that we're holding this company to ransom? So it's becoming much more intertwined.
We'll move on because we don't want to give anyone ideas. We just got some feedback from people online just to speak up, for us to speak up a little bit into the microphone for ourselves. So the cyber hard market, we've got a Slido question to start off this topic as well. This one's going to be a little bit more eye-opening. We're asking everyone what's your experience of the cyber insurance market, and I think the way it's worded is to just put 2 words in. 2 words. It's going to create a word cloud for us of what kinds of things your experience of the cyber insurance market's been like, and we'll let people answer that. Whilst I throw to JK, obviously, is going to be a bit of a focal point for this topic here. But why is the market hard? What is the outlook? Is it just a correction and underwriters still understanding the risk? And does that mean high premiums are here to stay? Can we get a bit of a snapshot on what is going on?
A lot of questions there. First question, why is it hard? It's claims activity, essentially, and all the actuarial modelling going on in the background. Cyber was an exceptionally well-performing class of business for a period of time, to the extent that some insurers were even moving coverages away from the crime management liability policies onto the cyber, because those books were burning at 150% plus, and the cyber books were still performing at sort of 20, 30%. That has completely changed in the last 18 months. So, and I don't think it will be a surprise to anyone based on all of the examples that are available in the media. I think absolutely the prices are here to stay and get worse. And there'll also be some other changes that we'll see. I think there'll be more and more coverages starting to be stripped out. I think the deductibles will be much higher, to the extent that corporate accounts will probably have a minimum $250,000 deductible.
Wow.
I wouldn't be surprised if some insurers start looking at that ransomware payment coverage, looking at the moral implications of that, and potentially removing it. And that's, interestingly enough, some clients are already starting to look at withdrawing that because, you know, with ESG being such a hot topic of corporate governance at the moment, it's sort of a stark contrast when you're investing all this money into sort of, you know, diversity and inclusion and sustainability and environment, and then you go and pay $1 million to a organisation which may or may not
Organised crime,
human trafficking, arms dealing, and all the rest of it. So some companies have just said that's something that we will not do in any event. So, you know, the insurance coverage can be adapted around that, and we'll just focus on our controls.
That's a really interesting overlap. So something I hadn't thought about. Do you want to bring up some of those answers there, because it will lead into that next question? And there you go. It looks like limited is the most answered there, right? The cover is limited. That's absolutely something we're seeing. Getting worse, very detailed, expensive, limited choice, getting harder, frustrating, costly. Not many, if any, positive words to say about the cyber insurance market. Freddie.
JK, it might be a question for you or anyone. The way you're talking about the way the sophistication of the kind of criminal aspect, I suppose, of the cyber environment. So it's almost like it's never going to be able to get any better, because, you know, in the case of like the D&O market, it's, you know, it's something that can be governed and regulated against, because it's, you know, and that's what contributes to the soft market again. But this is something where it's not going to be stunted. It's just going to get worse and worse and worse, and the hack's going to get more and more sophisticated and get more and more severe. So in terms of our clients, or anyone being able to buy insurance to cover you, to cover cyber liability, it's never, by the sounds of it, it's never going to get to the point where it's going to get any better or any softer. So are we facing something where it will actually become more or less impossible to buy a meaningful cyber policy?
Just before Johnny answers, I'll just relay that for the people online if you didn't hear it. Freddie's just raised that, you know, a market like the D&O market is one that can be regulated and can contribute to the turning of the market from a hard market to a soft market. But there is this fear that the cyber market is maybe uncontrollable, and how does it turn? So I think it's a question for Johnny, but I wouldn't mind also getting Chris M's view on that, and how do we get on top of it? So
yeah, I mean, the short answer is I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how it pays out, but I think the insurance market, there's always been a price for everything. So it may be that it becomes unaffordable. Insurers will probably start to use treaty reinsurance a lot more, so that they will be holding less of the risk themselves. Like I said earlier, I think the deductibles will go up. There was an article which came out in the AFR which got quite a lot of traction from our client base. A lot of them emailed it through to us saying, what do you think of this? Essentially saying cyber insurance is, what's the word, pointless, or not necessarily something I agree with, but saying that cyber insurance is being used incorrectly at the moment. It's being used as that sort of first responding mitigation tool, I suppose, whereas the expectation is that cyber should probably be sat off for big organizations excess of $1 million, and that all of your
internal resources
are trying to address those non-severity events, and then cyber insurance is still there, hopefully to a high level, but sat further up in the cloud, so that it's not responding to the same degree that it is now. Because if it continues to respond at this rate, there won't be any insurers left. We're already getting feedback from markets that, you know, loss ratios are into the hundreds of %. So we're going to see the next 12 months a lot more correction of everything: price, coverage, deductibles. Chris,
what's your view on that? Have we got a hope to regulate?
So I think we, you know, and Chris, I'll agree with this. We've always been in an arms race with criminals as organisations adopt new technology, the criminals are always one step ahead because they don't have to worry about executives and procurement and everything else. They just do it, and so they're much faster to use new technology to attack. But it's just this constant competition of who gets a little bit ahead. The reality is that most organisations don't even do the basics, and that's why they're getting caught out. And when we talk about the essential 8, half of what's on the essential 8 is just basic IT hygiene that people don't do.
Yeah.
And it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. 5 years ago, boards and executives didn't really care. That's an IT problem. We give you money for IT, you fix it. The CISO was under the CIO. The CIO would determine how much money security got. That's thankfully starting to change, and we're seeing the CISO becoming much more prominent within organisations with their own standalone budgets, with dotted reporting lines to CROs and CFOs. But we've got to continue to push clients and organisations to get the basics right. There's no point in putting in advanced technologies if you don't patch your systems, if you don't manage your passwords, if you don't do the basics. And a lot of organisations need to get the basics done before they go buy the new shiny toys.
Yeah, correct. That's something we're doing ourselves, is we've spent the time on our core infrastructure, and now we're moving to the systems on top of that. So.
I always tell clients, you've got to start with the process that you're trying to improve.
Yeah.
There's no point in buying technology and then try to retrofit the process.
Yes.
Because all that happens
expensive.
is, the process doesn't work and it falls apart and the technology is useless. So, some of the research that we did when I was at Gartner, sort of 10 years ago, that most technology is only used about 20%, 30% of its capability after 1 year, because people just left it. It didn't work. There was no process to support it.
Absolutely. So I think now we're going to have a bit of a flip. Before we reached a bit past halfway, and those words we saw on the word cloud about frustration and difficulty, we're going to strive to move to practical solutions and try and see how do we navigate that. And I'm going to throw this question to Chris R this time, bring him back into the conversation, and incident response plans, disaster recovery plans, the kinds of things that a few years ago, maybe even only just recently, were things that ticked a box, they sat in the top drawer and you updated it when you ordered to ask for them again. How's that changed, Chris? I mean, we've worked on that between you and I, and we've pulled that recovery plan out numerous times. Like, why is that so important? Why is this basic IT hygiene that Chris M was talking about? Talk to us about that. Gone are the days where it just sits in the top drawer.
Yeah, sure. So I guess I'm a bit of a nerd when it comes to this sort of stuff. I actually really enjoy testing the process, and at Steadfast, at a minimum, we do a full tabletop run through of our DR and incident response plan every year. And part of that is I guess making each department aware of their responsibilities and what the process is. So I mean, I'll give you a really good example. We'll come up with a scenario each year of how we've been attacked. It'll vary, and what that's impacted across the business. And then we'll engage with every department that could be impacted by that. So that's from the IT department, looking at whether or not they can actually restore their backups. It's all very well to say, tick, yep, we do backups. Well, when was the last time they were tested? So we put them on the spot and we make them prove it to us. Then, I know this will vary between organizational size, but we've got a marketing department. We get the marketing team involved and we say, look, if we would put out a press release tomorrow and say we've had an incident, there's potentially PI being exposed, how do we manage the public relations around this incident? And then looking at ops teams, we use SMS blasting system to send out comms to our staff. We're assuming things like email might be down, Teams chat, not available, etc. So how do you communicate what's happening with your staff? And COVID's obviously put a bit of a focus on this as well, because a lot of organizations, didn't have systems in place for managing their staff remotely. And it's meant that I guess a lot of the theoretical, has suddenly become the reality, and we've had to quickly pivot, make sure that we can actually run things, as we said we could in the plan. And the beauty of actually reviewing these on a regular basis is you get learnings. IT systems get changed, they get updated. There's new products that come in. People leave the organization. So going through your incident response plan and actually making sure the reality of what happens is the same as what you've documented. It's vitally important that you do that. I'll give you another example. We've had what's called a dark site in North Sydney for some time. It's a remote office where someone can go, or a team can go and run the company essentially. If our main premise was destroyed, maybe a gas leak or a fire or something like that. Now, again, going back to COVID, we've kind of demonstrated that that's probably something we won't look to in the future. It might be something that we can do away with because everyone has been so accustomed to working from home, and we can run a team effectively and keep managing that.
Yeah, I think that's I look at our own cyber response plan, and the first point in that is, I think, really important, just identifying who your team is. Who are the people that get on that phone call, get to sit in that room where something might come up. The CEO's involved, operations is involved, people in IT are involved, someone in finance might be involved. But then beyond that and our own internal team, we also just document who do we have at our disposal. Chris is one of those people, someone that we can call and say, this has happened, well, how can you help us here? We've got a copy of that.
I don't remember agreeing to that.
Well, you will get a call. We also have there our cyber insurance and the hotline that comes with that, the legal practitioner, which happens to be Clyde & Co, if I'm not mistaken. Having that information at your disposal and understood, so you can start to react quickly, and I guess Steadfast take that to another level to be able to say, sorry, lost my train of thought, to be able to say, we practiced this a month ago, we practiced this 6 months ago, we got the marketing team involved. When something happens, to say to your marketing division, we need you to put together a press release, to have a running start and have that half drafted. It sounds like really particular things, but it can really change how you respond. Chris brought up just how important it is to be able to respond, because sometimes these things are totally unavoidable. You can't protect yourself from it starting to happen. Adam, question.
Just a quick question. So obviously not every organisation is the size of the Steadfast Group. Some organisations are more needs the DRP and the IRP setting up that process. Are there any tips or tricks you'd give to organisations, I guess, earlier in that piece, who may not have the understanding and knowledge of Steadfast to kind of go and consult with?
Yeah, I'll relay that for people online. So question for any tips or advice, and I'll let anyone answer this one. Tips or advice, maybe smaller companies that are not yet sophisticated, not yet mature in terms of having the resources available for something like a dark site. Where will you start? And I think that will lead us into the next topic quite well. Chris, maybe.
Look, I think that there are plenty of tools and templates out there for small organisations to follow. There are plenty of standards that detail this step by step, and it's, to get a basic incident response plan and process in place is not super difficult for a small organisation. They don't have a lot of people. They don't have a complex technical environment, and if they've been around in the last 2 years, they're probably all in the cloud. So it makes things a little bit more simpler. One point I just want to make about what Chris was mentioning about incident response plans. If an attacker does come into your organisation, one of the first things they look for is your incident response plan. So, and because you've got to make it available to staff, so you can't hide it.
Yeah.
So it's on your intranet, so they will find it, and they will be able to know what you're going to do.
What you're going to do. Yeah.
And also, if you do have, if you are insured, make sure your breach response or your breach coach has a copy of your incident response plan, because if you get subjected to ransomware and you're locked out of everything, you don't have your plan. So make sure that somebody else has it.
It does need to be in a top drawer.
So it needs to be somewhere where you can get access to it if you don't have access to your systems.
I've missed one question that I wanted to ask JK, which I think is a really important one and a practical one. What's the difference between a risk that is seeing a 20-40% increase in premium and one that is seeing 50 and up to even 300% increase in premium? What are the differences in the risk and how it's communicated to insurer to get a different price?
Yeah, so the first, what did you say, 20 to 30%?
40%.
I mean, that gives you an idea of where the benchmark is at the moment in the hard market. For an insurer to agree to that sort of level, and we're talking probably mid-market corporate accounts here, the SME is kind of still an exception, and that they're still pretty cheap. But essentially, you need to be ticking all of the main boxes. So you need to be demonstrating an adherence to the principles of the Essential 8 up to whatever maturity level is appropriate for an organisation of your size and activities. If you're not doing some of those major things, insurers are essentially risk loading you. So some of the examples we've seen is organisations which have no privilege access management system. So essentially anyone within the organisation has the ability to have administrative privileges, make changes to the systems, download software which could potentially be harmful. Multi-factor authentication is almost an issue where you won't even get insurance. Now it's one of those things which is it's the source of so many claims that insurers are just saying, if you don't have it in place, why not? We're not even going to give you insurance. What are the other main things? I think if we start again looking at the bigger, more blue collar sort of businesses, incident response plan, absolutely, that's the tick box. But expanding on what you were saying earlier, the incident response plan is just a tick box. GSA have templates that we can provide to all of our clients, and you can just fill in some of the key details. That is just a tick box. That isn't necessarily good risk management. So you need to go the step beyond that, and you need to be demonstrating not only do we have a plan in place, but it's actually a really well thought out plan, and we periodically test it and we update it. And I think more and more we're starting to actually put together covering letters for insurers, or for really big clients doing insurer presentations, and
not just a proposal form.
Yeah, in that letter, you're essentially trying to draw the insurer's attention to all of the improvements that you're making, and on the basis that you are making those improvements. So you start off by basically making a statement that cyber risk management is at the forefront of our corporate risk governance. It's something that we are willing and plan to invest financial resources into. Here's a snapshot of all the changes that we've made through the year. So I think some of the people online may know that I'm using them as an example. We've moved off remote desktop protocol, which insurers hate, onto VPNs. We've done a full rollout of MFA. We've introduced a patching policy. We've introduced a privilege access management policy. Blah, blah, blah. Finishing paragraph. We can, continued investment. These are what we're planning for the next 12 months. And it will be penetration testing every 3 months, whatever it is, yours sincerely. And that's just one page which the insurers read before they even open up a proposal form or go through a 15-page ransomware addendum. It's just, these guys are on it. This is a good risk versus a bad risk. So it's about doing what needs to be done and then selling it. And that's where I think the broker comes in, is helping to advocate on your behalf in the market.
I think that you can't underestimate how important it is to show the retrospective successful delivery of projects, because I think so many insurers have been done over the years where clients have said, yeah, we'll do X, Y, and Z, and then 12 months later they go, oh, well, business priorities change, we didn't get around to it. But actually showing that you've got that pedigree of delivery, and that if you say you're going to do something, there's some inherent trust there that you're actually going to do it.
Correct.
Which will probably get a lot of clients over the line.
I think it's also worth, sorry, just one last thing on that topic, which is I think it's definitely a two-way street as well, and that's I guess that the benefit of using a broker in this space is making sure the policy that you're looking at is actually fit for purpose. I think there are a lot of people who just renew without actually bothering to look at whether or not that's still relevant for them. And that's the, I guess, the valuable insights you get through your broker. And I've heard of incidents in the past where a claim's been declined because someone's policy is very prescriptive about the fact that hackers came into their office and targeted their systems, and obviously with most of us now in the cloud, the insurer was able to decline that, and as disgusting as I felt, when I was asked in my opinion, I said the insurer is perfectly right to decline that because it was very prescriptive as to what they were covered for, and this does not fall into that category. So I really think that it's great when people are looking at their policy renewals to engage a broker to actually make sure you're getting that accurate advice and make sure it's fit for purpose.
Thanks, Chris. So moving on to that last topic, we've got another Slido question just to start this one off, but we're going to move to the Essential 8 and creating a cyber improvement plan. And really, I think I really like that word of basic IT hygiene and making that a starting point. So is there enough practical guidance on how to approach cyber risk at a business level? We've already heard a little bit from the panel suggesting that there is stuff out there, but we'd like to hear everyone, which one of those statements kind of fits you best? Oh, we might have lost that. Sure, right. We'll ask that question. We'll ask that question in a moment. Chris Rouse and Chris Mclaughin, what is the essential aid? How can it fit into a broader cyber strategy for the business? And what are the consequences of not adhering to it?
Well, I mean, I think that people should be looking to the essential 8 as the bare minimum that they're doing. Now, you know, when you actually look at some of the topics covered, be it patching, you know, the restricting of admin privileges, multi-factor, etc. These are what, you know, what JK was, I guess, alluding to, the minimum standards that they're expected by insurers these days. But they're putting aside the insurance piece. They're just the minimum standards you should have in your organisation. Now, you know, thankfully, it's quite prescriptive, and there's the different maturity levels which you can you know read over when you're looking into the essential 8. But it is worth just using that as your baseline, I guess. Particularly if you're quite early in your journey in cybersecurity, I think that it's a great place to start. You know, as mature organizations mature, they might look at some of the other, you know, I guess, more, broader accepted industry standards across the world, like ISO 27001 and the NIST 800 frameworks. But this is, you know, this is something the Australian government's put out and said, this is what we think, you know, an organisation should have in terms of their bare minimums. And if you're adhering to these, then you know you can stand up in front of a crowd and say, look, we're doing our best to try and ensure we've covered off this risk. And I think that in that example of ASIC versus RI advice, if they'd been able to stand up and say this, it might have been a very different outcome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything to add?
Yeah, look, I think, again, as Chris mentioned, it's some of the very basic controls you can put in place. The government actually say that if you put all of those 8 controls in place, it will prevent about 85% of known attacks. So it's a good place to start. But there's no substitute for good risk management. You know, making sure that you do understand your assets, what you're trying to protect, what level you need to protect them to, and putting an appropriate level of control. But you know, if you're starting, then essentially NIST cybersecurity framework, ISO 27000, as Chris said, they're relatively easy frameworks to be able to communicate to people without having to talk, you know, sort of too technically. So, you know, ISO 27 talks about iterative process of continual improvement and an information security management system for governing the processes. And this talks about identify, detect, respond, recover. These are things that even if you try to communicate a really complex topic, are relatively easy to do.
Yeah, it's something that we could probably have a whole another webinar on, but coming out of that Royal Commission, which had nothing to do with cyber and culture being key, I think that's so important. If you can push a positive culture in terms of cyber security. We were talking before, just before the webinar started, about spam emails, and yes, you can push out a lot of phishing, pretend phishing attacks, and catch people out and put them through training courses. But I find that a strong culture against this kind of stuff, and everyone in the business from top to bottom understanding it and living it and breathing it is really a really important line of defence. And I found when I saw the Essential 8 as an operations manager, it made it really simple for me to speak to someone like James, the CEO, and say, these are the basics, these are the things to tick off.
So that goes back to your first question, who's responsible for cyber? Is it board or executives? Well, in fact, it's everyone.
Yeah.
You know, we for so long in the sort of security space where, you know, users are our biggest threat, they're the biggest risk to the business. Well, actually, you know, they're also the first line of defense in your organization. And if you can train them properly, if you can create a good risk-based culture, if you can get people to be aware of the types of threats and the evolving threats and how it can damage the organization, and you reward the behavior for being a good sort of corporate citizen, you'll find that goes so much further than any technical control that you can put in place.
Become a stronger business for it.
You become a stronger business and people are more engaged in the process.
Rocco, one other thing, companies could consider just engaging an IT security consulting firm on a one-off basis, just to put that line in the sand, see where they fall on the chart. You know, $1,500 will get you an Essential 8 basic audit, and that would be not very much money to help you identify, this is where you've left the doors open, or you're pretty good, and here are some things that you can go to make yourself above and beyond and best in class. But if you can spend a tiny amount of money to identify what could be a huge corporate exposure, it's definitely worth doing.
Yeah, I think I think that's really important. I think something that helped me a couple of years ago is just drawing a picture of our IT network. Helped me understand where everything is at, and it was a good starting point. So move on to one of our last questions. I think we've just lost that Slido question, unfortunately, but we'll either bring it back up or share the responses with everyone. There we go. Georgia can hear me. Let's see the answers for that, Georgia, if you're able to flick them up. Yes, but it can be hard to find, which I'm not surprised about. And maybe that's something for us, Johnnie, to take out of this, is that maybe to proactively share some of those templates with our client base. I can see that being a big value. Templates are templates, though, so you really need to turn them into a living item. JK, Chris M, I think maybe where this answers, but I think it could be for Chris R as well. When something happens, what is the difference in how an insured business responds and how an uninsured business responds? We've touched on things like this, but what is the difference?
I think for us being like sort of a breach response coach and obviously having worked for a broker before, I think it's the Ghostbusters tagline is who you're going to call. If you're uninsured, what do you do? Who do you call? Do you have a retainer? Like, do you rely on your own people? What skills do you need? How are you going to manage the incident? And you can have the plans and process in place to take you through step by step, but you don't have that external support to help you. You're going to have to go and find it yourself.
Yeah.
And one thing that these companies do, if they find you're in a crisis, the prices sort of tend to go up.
Yeah.
Consultants love a crisis, and they'll take advantage of it. On the other hand, if you're insured, you phone your insurer, your breach coach. If you're already onboarded, the breach coaches will know who you are. They'll help you triage the incident, and they'll turn around and say, right, okay, do you need forensics? Do we need people to come in and help contain and eradicate the incident? Do we need external legal counsel? Do we need to inform the OAIC? Do we need to do it boom?
Yeah.
And behind, whether it's Clydeco or whether it's the other breach coaches, we typically have 70 or 80 vendors that sit behind us.
Wow.
And they're all at insurance rates, which are up to 30% cheaper than what they would get commercial rates. So not only are you getting somebody to help walk through end-to-end incident, working on your behalf, communicating internally, communicating with the insurer, communicating with the regulators. You've got somebody who's bringing in resources that are cheap or cheaper than you would pay if you were in an open market, if you were on your own.
Yeah.
And if you're talking about a claim that could be, 10, 15, $20 million, being able to save 30% is incredibly important. So the support that you get when you're insured is just not there when you're uninsured. You're effectively on your own to deal with it on your own and to get the right resources. If you're insured, you have the breach coach who holds your hand all the way through it. You have the panel of experts that are brought in when they are needed. The cost is managed and contained, and all of the communications is done on your behalf, so you can focus on getting your business up and running.
Really good one. I love that Ghostbusters line, and I think crisis is really important. Is who do you turn to when something does come up? Chris, how do you see it?
Look, I mean, I'm a little bit biased. I think when I see someone who is insured in our network, I'm always reaching out to Clyde & Co to help with the initial analysis. But in my, I guess, in previous careers, it's been a bit of a difficult one for people to handle, and I think the reason is that if they aren't insured and they've I guess had a significant breach or incident, those costs can really escalate. So I mean, I have seen people engage not Clyde & Co, but other companies where the bills have started coming in at 400,000 plus to manage the incident on their behalf because they didn't have the in-house capabilities to manage it. But this was something that was crippling their business, so they've had to be entirely reliant on someone else to support them through the process. So yeah, I think it certainly shows that whilst there's I guess quite large increases in premium that are hitting the market at the moment, that they really can pay off, in that crucial moment where you can engage someone without having to worry about, is this going to be so expensive that I will be ceasing trading?
Yeah, just carry on.
I think just to summarise those 2 points, essentially, if you have an insurance policy, you have a product there which is going to give you access to an incident response panel and pay for all of the costs of that cyber event. And if you don't, you're relying on having the internal competencies to respond to every aspect of that cyber event, and you're self-insuring the cost off of your balance sheet. I think in terms of having the internal competencies, like you referenced, having 70, 80 people that you subcontract or delegate the task to, IT is one thing, and you may have a CTO who's confident that they can get all your systems restored. But if you've got a huge privacy exposure, do you have the in-house legal know-how to know what your privacy compliance commitments are to respond in a way that's compliant and lawful? Because if you don't, the fines are 1.8 million, I think, last time I checked. So you want to make sure that you are responding not only in a way that's going to get the business up and running back as quickly as possible, but in a way which is in line with privacy legislation. Because if not, there's ramifications behind that as well.
Isn't there a disconnect there that the criminals might go to jail for 6 months, but the companies who have been attacked almost go bankrupt from it? So that's it for the kind of formal questions. We're going to open it up to everyone. We're also at 50 minutes, and I don't know how many questions are out there. Probably let a few questions run and see how we go. I've noticed a few questions pop up on the chat, which we can't see from in here, but we will either record some answers and share it out to everyone, or create an FAQ of what are the questions that have been asked, because we kind of want to deliver on this idea of helping people own the cyber market. So any questions from anyone, or anyone specifically, please go ahead.
On the topic of backups, why I think I'm currently looking at mutable backups with a company called Study. Just released another server in Sydney, 15 across the world, now they're just open in Sydney. Our process of going forward with that is the core data we need, we're going to keep in that system, as well as in our own system, which we have support, but that's very outdated. We're keeping that core data in Wasabi. Would it be ideal to keep everything in Wasabi, or just the core data?
Quite a specific one, but around backups, Chris, Rouse, the kind of conversation that we have every so often around backups and keeping a copy of your core data elsewhere, as opposed to keeping all of your data elsewhere. Do you think there is a right or wrong way in terms of what you back up? And maybe it's different depending on the industry you're in. Is it education that you're in, if that's what,
I think it's quite easy to sort of answer that. If it's data that you don't care about, then yeah, you could back up your core data. But the reality is, if you need that data for any reason whatsoever, then it's critical that you have a separate backup around that. And the world's moved on. In the past, you would usually back up to something like tape, and then you would have someone come and collect those tapes and take them off to a fireproof vault or whatever. Small organizations quite often would rotate USB hard drives. Someone would take it home so that it was offsite if there was a fire or a flood, etc. We've got cloud options now, but whatever is I guess is chosen should be very separate really from the rest of your network. And I'm sure Chris M would agree with this point, which is if the attackers are sitting in your network for potentially a year, 18 months, looking for your weaknesses, they can say it's a ransomware. They can look to encrypt not only your living data, but also your backups. So it's critical to have that segregation between the two.
Yeah, and you've got to think about the data that you're going to back up off-site as well. So it's not just, might not be just financial or student data or whatever. You've got to think about your configurations, about your license, and about all of the things that you need, that if your core systems were encrypted or unavailable, that you could get back up and running. So if you don't, again, like I said, if you don't have your licenses for all your technology stored somewhere, you're going to spend weeks trying to figure out, how the hell you're going to get things back. So just think about the type of data that's important to get the school or the business up and running, and make sure that you store that off-site, and make sure that you check those backups on a regular basis. and make sure that you've got integrity checking through the vendor, that they're not seeing any changes in the data that's not expected. Because as Chris said, you know, attackers come in and the first thing they look for is your data. And I got an example of a small regional airline that we got a call from about a year ago, and their backups were on a network server. First thing they did, the attackers encrypted the backups, encrypted everything, and went, right, give us $5 million.
Wow.
You know, the company couldn't pay it, only was making 20, 30 million a year. So like those examples, if you don't segregate your backups and then the attacker can get to them, you're screwed.
Something like
backups.
I've heard is potentially something to strive for is the 3-2-1 model. So do 3 backups, 2 of them online and 1 of them offline. That kind of addresses that issue.
I like that. Easy to follow. George, you might have a question from the crowd for us.
Yes, less of a question, more of a comment from Stephen R. with reference to the previous question. I'd just like to throw to you guys to comment on it. So Stephen R. says, it would be great to have access to resources that show us what possible savings in insurance premiums, etc., could be gained by implementing some of these projects. Would be a useful added cost avoidance comment in the business proposal to the board.
Yes. And that's something that I'm sure we could prepare from some benchmarking, but Chris add to that too.
Look, I mean, if you're going to leverage the savings you can get from the insurance panel, you're going to have to engage somebody to look at your program and what you're doing, and making sure that they can go to the you know, likes of ourselves who has a panel and the insurer has a panel, and say which vendors are on there, which vendors are relatable to the project or initiative that we're trying to execute. And then can we get the saving? Can we like either move vendor or can we like sort of restart the project with the new vendor and save the money? But the rates we should be able to get, or you should be able to get from the insurers. They're widely known within the policies.
Yeah, sounds like a CFO's question, and I think it's probably something that has to be had on a client by client basis. And one of the examples I was talking about earlier was exactly that. We had the feedback from the insurer at that 2021 renewal. If they don't do X, Y, and Z in the next 12 months, the premium will be this. And if they do it, it will be this. But I think it's one of those questions where you're trying to sell or gain approval from a board that this is how much we've got to spend in order to save this much in insurance premiums. But yes, there's the cost side of it, but there's also the risk enhancement side as well, which I think needs to be need to try and factor it into your financial metrics. Because I
think Chris will agree with this. Try to get a return on investment in security is incredibly difficult. It is incredibly difficult. So using the panel rates versus commercial rates is one way to show that there are benefits of getting insurance and that you can offset those increases in premium. And also, like says, you know, quantifying the risk, quantifying the scenarios that are going to lead to the greatest loss, looking at how that flows through the first and third party losses. Taking a scenario that then you can map the controls to, and then you can actually turn around and say, well, if we spend, you know, $100,000 on enhancing these 5 controls, you know, that is potentially going to avert a ransomware, which is going to cost us $4 or $5 million. So it's trying to using
some real life examples.
Use real life examples. You know, the insurers, the brokers, ourselves, we've got mountains of data that can turn and say, well, this is how this happened. And that's why we see coming through on the submission forms, like everything that's on the submission forms is a lack of or breach of control that's led to a loss that the insurers have seen. You know, so all of that information and insight you can push into your business cases to show there is real tangible value and return on investment.
Yeah, this might sound like a shameless plug, but use GSA to help you communicate to your board, whether it be to provide a summary, to provide some claims examples, to provide the kind of things that Johnnie just explained there. But it really is going to be on a client to client basis. But use us to help you communicate to your board. It's something we like to do regularly. You know, it's important.
So I use an external IT company to manage pretty much all my IT stuff. How much of the liability is on them or on us? We have a massive tab.
Yeah, interesting question. I think one for Johnnie, possibly. And just to relay, Chris, if you didn't hear, if you're using an external company, where does the liability lie with them or with us? I assume it might be the importance of documentation and contracts, but I'll let Johnnie answer.
I would expect it will be all care, no liability. That's what most of the engagement clauses in the contracts will state, because if they don't, you know, they may have 10,000 clients all using their services, and so they cannot put themselves up for that aggregation exposure. So they basically say, we'll do the best job we can, but if for whatever reason we're negligent or whatever, and it leads to a loss, then you can't come and claim it back. So I think that's another key in having the insurance to fall back on.
And then it's your job to manage the risk and to manage that vendor relationship, making sure, like we see a lot of claims coming through third party risk and through the supply chain.
Yeah.
You know, so it's a massive threat vector for you that your supplier can get compromised. And if they get compromised, you're not going to know, because you don't have eyes on the technology, and you're probably getting a weekly SLA report that's all green, you know, that doesn't give you any insider information. So you should consider actually doing an assessment against them, not just a questionnaire, but get somebody to go in and have a look and see how they're managing security.
Yeah, start by that, asking question. How do you deal with this? What would you do if this happened to us? And let that conversation start and see.
You don't have a leg to stand on. If there's personal data breached, even if it's through your supplier, you're still responsible.
Yeah. Hold them to account.
Kind of on that point, what we were talking about earlier with coverage restrictions, one of something which is coming down the pipe, and like Chubb are going to be the first ones to introduce it, is a shared computer system endorsement, which is essentially going to apply a higher deductible and a co-insurance provision, which basically says you as the insured business have to pay 5, 10, 15, 30% of any risk that relates to a ransomware where it's a shared computer system, which more and more businesses are using, outsourced service providers, cloud providers. And the reason the insurers are doing that is because it's a massive aggregate issue. Microsoft Azure goes down for a week. That's 100,000, hundreds of thousands, millions of clients that go down. So they need to manage that aggregate exposure. But you also need to be aware that I think that coverage is going to be reined in the next year or so.
Okay, everyone, we've reached an hour, so we might call it there with the kind of formal webinar and questions. We'll switch offline soon, but just a huge thanks to particularly the two Chris's for joining us externally, and also to Johnnie. Really insightful stuff there, and it sounds like you know more about IT than maybe the operations team, but but thanks everyone. Thanks for those here in attendance. Thanks for those online. We're going to follow through here and provide, if not the recording, at least some of the questions and answers and some of those bits of information that we've all asked for. Huge thanks to Chris whilst he's not unwell in particular.
Thank you.
But thank you everyone. Appreciate it.
Thanks everyone. See you later.